All right, well, thanks for sticking around. There's technology for you. I think I'm doing a few people's jobs by myself, and I think that's what's causing the problem here. I never overdo anything, right? Yeah, having some camera issues and all sorts of stuff. I was trying to set it up so we had extra camera angles, but we'll work on it next time. And of course, you know, audio is always important too. So I thought the way I was going to run this was using TalkBack mic, and that way you don't have to hear feedback and stuff like that. Anybody listening, can you just tell me if everything sounds all right? That way I can take these headphones off. Cool, thanks, man. Yeah, so there's been a whole bunch of people. Like, I always like helping people and in any kind of creative process, and I like trying to teach people and share things that I've been fortunate to learn from a lot of good mentors. Whether it be stuff that I've learned in the music world or video world or whatever. And so in doing this and all the crazy things that are going on right now, you know, I really wanted to find a way to kind of help people kind of, you know, do something creative and try to make something positive out of, you know, all the craziness that's happening right now. So a while back I reached out and started asking people, like, hey, you know, what are the sticking points for you know, music production? Like, what are you having a hard time with? Or what haven't you seen in tutorials and or anything of that nature? And so we put together, with the help of all of you, like some pretty comprehensive lists, and kind of like a little bit daunting, but it was also kind of cool because it's challenging, and if you're trying to help people out and teach people stuff, you better know your own stuff to begin with. And during that whole process, one of the things that I thought was pretty cool was thinking like, what if we try to do something that was regular, like once a week or so, and try to make it some sort of like a collaborative process, right? I wanted to make sure everything looked cool, and you could get good angles and like clean audio and stuff like that. But I also thought it'd be kind of neat if it was somewhat interactive, and actually kind of fun and relaxed. So it wasn't kind of like a one-way type of thing. So I'm going to do my best to talk about some things and show some things and switch the cameras and actually kind of look at the questions and stuff too. But that's my disclaimer. And so I'm going to kind of look at some of my notes. I didn't have enough time to actually prepare like, some cool graphics or something like that. But maybe, if I pull this down and edit it up and kind of take out all my stumbles and silly stuff, then we could put some graphics or something over it. Anyway, I'm going to go through and I'm going to kind of look at like some of the things that we talked about and kind of show you what my kind of roadmap would be for, starting a song. One of the biggest things that I got as far as questions was like, hey, how do you start a song from scratch? Right? Like that was overwhelmingly, that was like the biggest thing that I was hearing from people. And the other thing was, how do you be creative? Like, can you just flip it on or not? And these are like legit deep questions that they're not technical. They're really more kind of philosophical. And to me, that's actually really important, right? So let me look at my notes real quick. Hey, what's up? What's up, dude? Okay, cool. All right. So I think like as far as tonight goes, one of the things like I don't know that we're gonna get into a ton of technical stuff, but what I wanted to do was kind of like, I mean, a lot of you folks know me, but like one of the things that I've always, one of my philosophies that I always kind of keep coming back to is learn the process, right? Like you can do pretty much anything as far as a technique as long as you practice it, right? But if you learn a process, it doesn't matter what DAW you're using, regardless of what it is, what platform it is, what baking a cake, building a car, whatever, making a song. If you learn the process, it will translate, right? So one of the things that I really think about is like, how do we kind of figure out what our process is going to be, so that way we're maximizing our creativity, we're maximizing our time, right? And we're trying to find ways to, get every kind of ounce out of that time that you have that's very valuable, and make something, great from it. While meanwhile avoiding all the roadblocks, good or bad, just, daily life, frustration, learning new software, learning new hardware, whatever it may be. So when we were talking about some of these things, some of the things that I've tried to, when I've helped people, over the years, I've tried to say, learn the process first, and then the technique will come. You know what I mean? Learn how you're gonna write a song or arrange a song first, and then the software will come with it. Whether you're in Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, Cubase, it doesn't matter, because they're all speaking pretty much the same language, right? So just like with anything, that's something that you'll probably hear me say throughout, because I'm trying to kind of drive that concept home, right? And again, whether it's, audio production, video production, anything creative, like there's a lot of different ways to get to the same end goal. So I guess my kind of disclaimer would be, I don't do everything the right way, but I do things the right way for me, and I do them the right way for me until I learn otherwise, right? And if you watch one of these tutorials from me or Richie Houghton or Junkie XL or whomever it may be, if you take one thing away from it, that's a win, right? So let me kind of talk about how I would go about starting a song from scratch, And I'm going to try to check my notes and see like if anybody has any questions or anything like that. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up like just a blank template so you can kind of see where I would start. All right. Oh, no, I don't want to save. Here, let's try this. I think I need a production assistant. I'm not there yet, but all right, so I'm going to go ahead and let a new, don't save. I'm going to let a new, pull up a new template. And while that's doing that, one of the things, it's funny because, like I said, I've been lucky enough to have some really amazing mentors over the years. And I was just having a conversation the other day with a mentor and one of my very best friends. And it was funny because he brought up, he's like, man, now I just like to get everything down in my head before I even sit in front of the computer. And then I do everything in like a third of the time, and there's so much to be said about that. I know that all of us have sat down in front of a computer or a piano or whatever it may be, drum machine, and you're just trying to, get something out because you're like, man, this is the time that I have to work on music. But there's almost like sometimes there's nothing on deck in your brain, and so you're just kind of sitting around, plunking with sounds or messing with presets and stuff. And next thing you know, you spent your 3.5 hours, that you were trying to work on a new tune, and it's just gone, and there's nothing really to show for it. And one of the things that with kind of life and getting older and seeing like how valuable time is, I've been learning more and more that as you start to get those ideas, you want to get them out as soon as you can, but also just, kind of like sleeping on it and coming up with what you're going to try to do. And then when you sit down and you have that time to be creative, you've already got an idea. You've already started to write the speech in your head. You've already started to paint the picture in your head. You know what I mean? And it makes things a lot easier because then you have a direction before you even start getting distracted by sounds and plugins and who knows what else, bright lights in the studio, and I think that goes like a long way. And a little side note, I know I'm talking a lot, but that's kind of the point of this first little, whatever we want to call it, episode, or I don't know. But one of the other things too, and I learned this a long time ago from a drum teacher, and it was really cool because he said two things that really stuck with me. One was he was like, you want to be, when you're playing the drums, you want to be as comfortable behind the drums as you are in your living room, right? And I feel the same way about when you're in the studio, behind a piano, or when you're writing or mixing or arranging or whatever. So that's something that we'll circle back to, right? One of the other things that he said was that, when you're thinking about when you're thinking about music, like basically, every song, needs to do just one thing well, right? And I think a lot of times people get confused when they're trying to make, a really cool song, like trying to get it to do too many things. And a lot of times it really just has to do one thing really well, right? Anyway, the other thing to look at, sometimes when we're, we've got jobs, we've got family, or kids, whatever, hobbies too, right? It's important, right? To have hobbies and to do stuff that isn't just, that makes us kind of who we are, right? Sometimes, you only have a little bit of time, and if you try to force, being creative in a small amount of time, it might have been a really, that day might have been the worst day you've had in a long time, and you're not going to be able to kind of just cut that loose on a drop of a dime, drop of a hat, and then immediately be creative. So I had another teacher tell me, do one thing every day in your in your craft, right? So whether it's listening to new tunes on Beatport or on Spotify, or whether it's working on a track, or whether it's updating your social media profile. I'm the worst person about that. Everybody knows that. But anything that's related to what your craft is, or watching tutorials or something, if you're doing that every day, then you're like laying the foundation, right? So you can kind of budget that time. So you got 15 minutes and you've had just an awful day. So dude, don't try to sit down and try to, do something really, intense. Like maybe it's a good time to work on, album cover art or something that you might want to use in the future, or, updating your press kit, right? And I know that I'm basically basing a lot of these things that I'm kind of jumping around with off of things that, you guys have asked me about, and so I'm trying not to seem like a, kind of ADD or anything like that, but this really is kind of like the overarching, how do we be creative? How do we like really, we're adults, we've got lives, but we also have passions, right? So how do we kind of, get it all together without, without being, it's tricky. It is tricky. So, all right, let me pull up my notes, and I want to show you this template here. All right, cool. And I'm doing my best to step on the talkback mic, so I'm not just talking to myself. So that's good too. All right, I'll preface it with this. I've worked with all kinds of different templates, and there's no right one and there's no wrong one. To me, it's what works best for you, right? And what cuts down time on repetitive tasks, right? So, in the past, I've gone through and made these templates that have all these, plugins and all this crazy stuff going on. It takes like 15 minutes for your project to open, even though there's nothing in it, right? And it's got like Serum and Massive and Silent and Nexus and all the cool stuff. I got no problem with it. I use those all the time. But it ends up being you've got like 50 tracks of crap that you're not going to use that, unless they're all bypassed, they're still going to use some resources, right? And I'm still rocking a 2008 Mac Pro and the Mac Pro Tower in the studio, and I love it. But, at some point, it's going to hit the fan, right? And so I like to just kind of keep it as simple as possible. And so what I've done, let me try to zoom in because I'm using, it's not screen capture software because I'm using one like a hardware solution. So I think maybe in the future I might just do this all, locally on this machine. I think part of the problem is going to be that the screen is just, resolution's pretty high and I can't zoom in as much as I want. All right, well, I'll do my best to kind of explain this, and then, moving forward, this is all a learning experience for everybody, right? Like, every day you should be learning, and I'm kind of learning how to do some of this stuff. So, I'm a firm believer in workflow. Obviously, I'm sure you already kind of heard my spiel, but anything that I think is going to be repetitive, that's where I like to try to kind of start from scratch. So what you can see here is I'm kind of like scrolling through these groups, and a lot of templates are like this, right? And often what you'll have is for each one of these groups of multiple instruments, you'll have some compression and EQ or whatever to treat each one. So what I generally do is I'll have kind of these now this is in Ableton, but it doesn't matter. Like in Logic, you can do the channel strip settings. Pretty much any DAW can save whatever the settings are going to be. for presets. But particularly, I'm right now the main DAW that I'm using is Ableton. So what I'm doing is just using audio effects racks, and I throw them in each channel, but then I disable everything. And reason being, kind of like what I was saying before, sometimes we have a tendency to like overdo all this stuff, and you'll have you have like 10 or 5 or 10 plugins on each subgroup, and you don't necessarily to treat all those sounds. Think about when you're downloading sounds from any kind of sound library, right? And this is a whole nother topic that we'll talk about later, but if you're using sounds from a sound library, whether it's like Vengeance or Splice or Noise or whatever, like those sounds have already had a lot of processing done to them, right? And like the first thing that a lot of people want to do is pull those sounds in and then just start, more and more saturation and stuff like that. And like there's already and a lot of them, there's already kind of like, they've already lost all the dynamic range or any kind of life to them in a lot of ways, because they're trying to go for that, that metallic, especially like EDM and trap, that sound. So one thing that I've noticed kind of in my, fails a lot of times, or just making things harder than they need to be, is that nothing, things don't always need all that, right? So again, like in this particular one that I've been using this year, this template, a lot of the stuff is in there and just bypassed, and a lot of times I don't even really use it, to be honest. So anyway, and that's kind of just a philosophy thing. It's like, if you've got all these things in there, you might just keep messing with it just out of, because it's there and it sounds cool, but eventually you'll end up, I don't know. It's just one of those things that the way that my brain works, a lot of times I like to try to keep it simple. So as you can see, like, I've got these subgroups, and I just similar to a lot of other templates you've probably seen, kick, drums, synths. A friend of mine got me turned on to using, instead of doing it just by groups, also doing a subgroup for like your drop synths or your drop sounds, which in dance music is a really good way to do it, because sometimes when you have a drop, you want to treat that low end differently than you would if it was like the synths that was over the body part of the song, or if there were synths that were over, vocals and stuff, like during a verse, or a verse and chorus even. And then at the end, one of the things that I do is I put, so in Ableton, it's operator, but basically it's just a simple sine wave, right? And I'll get back to that. And this has to do with not having distractions, okay? I'll come back to that in just a minute. Then with each of these groups, basically they'll have some sort of, I'll put a utility sometimes in case I need to force something mono, or if there's something weird going on, or if you want to do the bass mono below. There's also third-party plugins like this from like Brainworks that work really well. Whatever works. I mean, honestly, most DAWs have really good plugins, and unless you're getting into stuff that's really trying to characterize and like flavor the sounds, I mean, you can usually get away with most of the built-in stuff. And again, that's some stuff that I had covered later that we would talk about. And as far as these groups, it's basically, utility and some sort of compression if needed, and then an EQ. And sometimes there will be some sort of, either just light distortion or saturation. But again, I almost always keep them all bypassed. And what'll save some time is that you'll notice that in some of these, I know it's hard to see, we'll fix this later, but in some of these groups, there's already EQ curves in there. And that actually is a really big time saver. So like if this was a vocal group, I'd have kind of a higher lift around 3 or 4K. If it's synths, I kind of roll the low end off, knowing that this isn't where the drop would happen. And honestly, like lately, one thing that I've been doing a lot with vocals, especially, if there's a vocal song, I will go ahead and start to cut just gently around 1K, depending on if it's a male vocal or female vocal. And sometimes I'll roll it a little bit because, there's that's right where the human ear is like the most sensitive in that area. So sometimes I'll just kind of roll it in and out, and then see where it's at. And a lot of times some of these sounds that are really heavily processed right in there, like plucks and stuff, EDM sounds, what you can do is and we'll cover this later in the EQ stuff, but you can actually looking for my shortcut on here, but you can automate, when the vocal comes in, just turn that on. It cuts that section out, and then when the vocal comes out, you go back and forth. And that way you're not compressing anything. You don't need to compress. You just, need to EQ. And this is all stuff that just, kind of over time, I've just started to notice, So anyway, this is kind of where I start, to be honest. And with that, like for some of these subgroups, let's see what you can see here. With the kick, I'll leave just like just a kick sample in there. And on here, I'll just leave quarter notes, just regular. And not that I'm making house tunes all the time, but it gets me the notes in here that are, at the MIDI level that I want to start from. And so from here, I can already start doing this. And the other added bonus of this is if you drop a acapella in here or something that you're going to do a bootleg or something of, this kind of helps you figure out where your tempo is. Even though you got a metronome, and you can do the click part, sometimes that'll really get lost. And so this kind of helps me kind of wrap my head around what the song is going to sound like. And if it's going to be, a breaks track, you just slide them over, and next thing you know, you got a break beat. The sound doesn't really matter at this point. It's just, the sound is just kind of a generic kick sound. So, if you just started this template, if I just hit play, this is what you'll hear. So, there's nothing really special about it. But, again, think of how much time you would say, all right, I got a new track. All right, well, let me put a simpler, sampler, plug in here, and then let me find it, and then I got to open this up, and then I got to put some quarter notes in here, and then I got to, put a snare sound in here. So I've noticed that I can do that, and I can put some, just held notes. Those could be used for like effects or a sequencer sound or an arpeggiator or something like that. And really, that's pretty much it. Like, I might have a couple plugins in the rest of it, but I noticed that I just started spending more time deleting stuff than using what I'd put in there. And so that's kind of how I got to that point. Most of these subgroups here just have an empty MIDI track or with no plugin on it, or empty audio tracks, and that's really pretty much it. Let me check the comments real quick just to see if there's anything I gotta look at. All right, now, one of the other things that I do when I start is if I'm gonna start a tune based on any kind of melody that I want to use, I think where a lot of people get lost sometimes and waste a lot of time is pulling up a really cool, we got all these cool synths, right? We could pull up any one of these, Serum or Nexus or Sublab, Silence, whatever, and then or Contact. You just get lost in all the presets and all the sounds, and I know like sound design is a whole separate thing. If you're into making sounds from scratch, that's great. But my advice is, like, if you're gonna make a song based on sound design, that's one thing, right? When you hear like some of the really good Crystal Method tunes from back in the day, like those were based on like sound design, like some of them, right? But the thing is, philosophically, you got to think about, what do I want this song to do well? Do I want it to have a really good bass line? Do I want it to have this dope drop, or do I want it to have this really cool vocal or melody hook? or like this old housey sound, or this really cool repeating riff, and then let that drive your decision on how you start putting that song together. So, if you have this vocal that you heard wherever, it could be on, Spotify or something like that. Every once in a while I pull up the EDM station and the trap one, like different channels, just to hear stuff, one, to see what's relevant, but two, to see if I get any ideas of stuff to sample, and if you hear it, something that you can pull, like snag a clean sample, it's like, yes. And then, I'll go buy that tune and I put it in a folder. And I keep some folders on my desktop that basically are, again, this is probably going to be hard to see, but based upon, current stuff that might end up being a project. So I like to keep, one for like bootlegs and mashups. This one has some progressive house samples, from over the years, because there's a lot of good progressive music that's never been used, like reused again, where you could pull a little section from it. Also, every once in a while I go through some vinyl records of mine and sample stuff. To be honest, I really don't have time to do that most of the time, but if I like get a hankering to do it, then I'll get a whole bunch of them and then just, take an afternoon and do it. And then also I make a separate, to kind of go a little more granular, I make a separate folder for bootlegs and mashups. So sometimes you hear a tune that's like, oh man, I want to do a remix of this, or I want to make a mashup of it. And I usually hear like, oh, can I pull a clean sample of it and do like a release, Or do I want to just kind of let this go true to the original, knowing that I'll never do anything with it other than play it at some live shows or give it out for free, which is fine. And so in my brain, I kind of like to separate those two things. So one is something you can pull from for a release, and the other one's something that would kind of go in a different category. And again, that's fine however you want to do it. But for me, that kind of helps me not try to do some crazy stuff with a song that you're never going to get, like a clean enough sample to use well, right? You've heard like the bootleg do-it-yourself acapellas that it sounds like they're underwater because there's so much like comb filtering and just weird stuff happening with it. Sometimes it's just like best to let that go. If you want to do a bootleg, just filter out the low end and have fun with it and call it a day. And coming back to like, time management, if you're going to do a bootleg, don't spend a lot of time on it, right? Because you're not going to release it. I mean, that's how I look at it. And again, these are just kind of like my viewpoints and some people that I work with, But again, if you hear something cool, make some folders, and so that way you can, like what we were talking about earlier, you can get those ideas and shelve them and table them, and then kind of come back to them, right? So if I'm just feeling something, I can go back in this folder. If I've got, a nice little chunk of time to work on something, I can go back in here and say, oh man, I'm feeling like doing a bootleg today, and I could go through here. Oh yeah, this is still relevant. Sounds good. And then next thing you know, you could turn something around really quick, right? So that said, if I'm going to go through here and look at some of these things that I would want to start a song from, I've got some old breaks samples in here. I've got, different tunes that I was thinking about sampling. What I would recommend is, if I was working on a new tune, I would kind of go through here and just see what would drive these songs, If I wanted to make something based on a female vocal track, then, well, that's going to be the thing that leads it. If you're going to try to make a song that just has like a really sick drop in it, then you got to focus around that. And the reason that I'm saying that is, this kind of goes back to like, how do you start, and how do you not just stare at the screen for a while and then waste time and then be frustrated, at the end of your allotted kind of studio time. If you have a little bit of a plan coming in, even if you don't know in your head even if you don't have a specific plan, but you can kind of come in and say, I'm going to make a song that is just going to have this, sick groove in it. That it could be a transition track, but it's going to be the coolest transition track you've heard in a while. Then there you go. Like, just follow it. Just chase it. You know what I mean? Using that as an example, I'd probably start with drums, right? And If I wanted to make, you know, a song based on a vocal, obviously I'd start there. I'd figure out what tempo it is and kind of like where I wanted it to sit and what part I wanted it to emphasize. So I've had a lot of people ask, like, do you start programming drums first? Do you start programming instruments or whatever? And that's kind of the answer that I give them. And I hate saying, well, it depends, because that's kind of a generic thing. But, you know, it does depend on what you want to drive, what's going to drive that song. And I don't want to be redundant, you know, but I hope that, you know, especially, you know, if people kind of tune it in and out or whatever, sometime over the next, you know, few times that we do this, I can try to, like, you know, kind of reiterate some of these things that have just kind of really helped me a lot. 'Cause, you know, just like with the template thing, if you always start programming drums first, that's fine for you if that works for you. But sometimes you're kind of, to me, I'm doing like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. You know, it's not gonna, if the song isn't based on the low end, obviously it's bass music, but I mean, let's be honest. Like, what is the one thing that's gonna make this song set off differently? And if it's not just the low end, then start with what you think is gonna be the emphasis of the song, and then just follow it, right? As you do that, get the ideas out as fast as you can, and that comes to why I was talking about putting just a plain. It can be Operator and Ableton. It can just be a plain synth that has like a default or an, you know, initialized preset on it. Or in Logic, I used to use an electric piano just because it was like a basic sound, and that way I could go in and start to pluck out whatever the melody was, or whatever the bass line would be, without, we've all done it, without sitting there combing through presets. Next thing you know, 10 minutes have gone. And that melody line that you spent all that time picking those presets on, you're never going to use anyway, because it wasn't the melody line that really fit the song, right? So this has been something that I've used for quite a while, and it's saved me so much time. Because this, if you're just basing something on the notes themselves and not the kind of bells and whistles, unless the song is a sound design driven song, this will really focus your arrangement to make sure that your notes work, that the music theory is there, that the chord progressions are right, and that your song structure makes a little bit more sense. I hope I'm making some sense here. All right, let me check my computer real quick. I need to check my notes here to make sure I don't get, you know, too far out of whack. All right, cool. So the thing that this kind of ties into, you know, with when you're thinking about what the song wants to do well, this really goes, I would say, hand in glove with what are your aspirations for this project. And this could go for music, this could go for visual, you know, graphic design, videos, any kind of you know, creative endeavor that you're in. If having some sort of a goal really will really help you out, you know. And I think a lot of times there's frustration about, you know, how can I put it? Sometimes, you know, people go out and they make music that's good music. And this has happened to me too. I had a progressive house label, and I thought the music on it was good, which it was, you know, for where I was at that point, you know, in kind of like my musical career, or, you know, producing and engineering kind of journey, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I would talk to some friends, and I was like, you know, I've sent it to some house labels and progressive labels, and, you know, no one seems to want to pick it up. And I finally had a good friend and, you know, mentor say, there's nothing wrong with the music, it just doesn't sound like what's on that label, right? And like a light bulb went on. I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense, right? And so sometimes we kind of get caught up in, well, my music's good. Uh, well, yeah, it is, but is it the right music for the platform that you're trying to send it to? Is it the right music for the label that you're trying to pitch it to, right? If you want to have your music licensed in commercials, is it kind of on par with what'll be out there? And I'm not saying sound like everybody else. By all means, kind of forge your own path, but also understand why there are certain sounds in certain areas. If you make like a grime or drum and bass track, and you try to send it to Spinnin' Records, they're going to say, yeah, this isn't going to work, because that's not what their brand is. So I think a lot of times it's important to kind of ask ourselves, where do we want to go with this? And it could be that I just want this song to be a stepping stone to the next project that I do, and that's fine. A lot of the questions are, kind of like feedback and things that came up too is like, I never finish products. I start projects and I never finish them, and that's really common, right? That's common with any kind of creative person. But part of the process, like we talked about, process is getting from point A to point B to point C is finishing projects, right? Give yourself some sort of a deadline. It can be arbitrary, but at least say, hey, I'm going to hold myself accountable to try to finish this song by here, right? And then you can say, cool, all right, cool, man, it's done. Nothing may ever happen with this song, but guess what? That was a stepping stone to the next thing that I'm going to do, because during that process, I learned, these 3 or 4 or 5 techniques. And then from there, think about your next goal, right? And I mean, that's kind of like a life thing too, but I mean, with music especially, because we get really frustrated, but the more work that you do, and the more projects that you finish and you take across the goal line, for lack of better terms, the better you get, and that is what really kind of sticks, and during those processes, you'll also see things that work better for you, so you can start cutting time here and there. I don't need to use this template. I don't need to do this. I've got all this outboard gear that I bought because I thought it was really cool and I'd make me better or whatever. And then you're like, crap, I can do all this in the box, and then I'm not programming MIDI or whatever. Nothing against that, but I mean, everyone's different and every process is different. But as you do that and you kind of end projects and move on to the next one and keep going on to the next one, you'll kind of refine your own process, and you'll learn a lot more about you and what makes you more effective, right? So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something too. So let me look here real quick to make sure I'm not missing anything. And again, I know I've been chatting a lot, but I'm trying to kind of lay some foundation for stuff that we're gonna start covering coming up here. All right, so what kind of tune do we want to make? I guess that would be my first question, because I have not gone through. I haven't gone through. I haven't. A lot of times you'll see like product demos or people do things online, and they'll say, well, I pulled aside a couple things here, and obviously they all work together. Like I haven't, prepared any specific thoughts in my head about what would be some to start for a new tune for this. So based on the stuff that we've talked about, I mean, does anyone out there have any ideas as far as what kind of tune we'd want to make? I mean, do we want to try to make like some sort of, like a really cool low end track, like a bass track, or something like something that could be more melodic driven, or a transitional track, or something that would be vocal driven? Well, yeah, we'll do a breaks tune. Yeah, we'll definitely do a breaks tune. Yeah, I got that part. But what kind? You know, like, do we want like something that'd be a peak hour? Do we want something that'd be like a something that you would hear kind of like as an opener, or something that would be focused on new school breaks? All right, that's cool. Um, let's see. So now, you know, when you're starting to look at something like that, what this is another place that you can go, right? Like if you're gonna say new school breaks, and then using that as an example. All right, cool. Yeah, we can do that. We got wobbles and zaps too. A buddy of mine just showed on. He was the guy that taught me how to spin records. So, and really a shout out to John Kinesis from Jacksonville, who got him to start spinning records. So that just kind of shows you how you know how things work, right? Like you learn stuff, and you're lucky enough to have people teach you stuff, and then you know you pass it along, right? All right. So if we're gonna make a new school breaks, I mean, you know, what would be our kind of motivation? You know, where do you look for that? Do you go? Got all kinds of things open here. You know, do you go to Beatport and listen to what you know the new school breaks labels are doing now, or do you think of something that was like a really cool new school breaks track, you know, back in the day, or do you, you know, and I guess that's kind of where you would want to see kind of where where those kind of thoughts start to kind of build up in your head, you know? So if we're gonna start the bottom up for like a new school breaks track, like I'm thinking of stuff that was on like oh boy, that was like TCR, like Blim, like that's what I kind of think of when I think of it. Some hybrid, kind of on teetering. Renee Pilgrim, Meet Katie, like that's kind of what I think of when I think of new school, kind of new school progressive breaks. So to me, like that was really kind of drum driven, you know, and it also had like yeah, those like really grimy sounds and stuff like that. So where I would start with that would probably be, you know, starting with the drums, you know. And again, what I would do is I wouldn't get too caught up in the sound design part of it, you know. So I would probably let me switch my screen here. I would probably kind of come up here and set, you know, set this like a loop for like 8 bars, and I would quickly kind of go through and start to put kind of just a basic drum loop together, and then knowing that if we start to pull some samples or any kind of things that we want to use, that drum loop could kind of change based on, you know, if we find a sample of a cool bass line or something that we want to use. So I'm going to kind of go through how I'd do this. And again, at this point in the tune, I would start pretty quickly. So I'm going to go through and start moving the kick drum around a little bit just to see what we can come up with. I'm going to see what happens. This might be a bad idea, but I'm going to try to mess around with that downbeat on that second bar just to see if I can make anything kind of weird happen. I'll probably end up changing it. And again, I haven't messed with the sounds or anything. I'm just moving stuff around really quick to try to get an idea. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. And so when I save stuff too, the reason that I save things with numbers in the front is that I put what just for my own kind of sanity. I go through, and my numbering system is based on how many projects I've done that year. Um, so the first two digits are from the year, and the second two digits are from the number of projects, right? So this one was 2020, so I've done 20 tracks this year. And that also kind of helps me hold myself accountable to like, how many tunes have I done this year? Well, if I'm up to track 20 and how many have I released or whatever reason, it helps me kind of, it's a barometer of what's happening with my projects. Am I finishing them or not, you know? All right, and so for the snare drum part, this is kind of like a trappy sound. I'm gonna leave it for now. It's not gonna fit what we're gonna do, but I also on the second snare drum track, I've got another sound. Let's see. I'm just gonna slide this down, and we'll use this one for now. But again, I'm not wasting any time messing around with finding a new sound. So what I was doing was just this is where I wish I had my other camera working right, but what I was doing was going through and tightening up the release on that, so you could kind of see if I can. I don't never remember which ones go full screen or not. So I could Bueller. And again, not spending a lot of time on it. I use an Ableton Push, and one of the things I really like about it is that I can kind of do that with my hands while a loop is playing without even slowing down at all. So I'll undo that and do that again real quick. And again, I'm not spending a lot of time on it. I'm just doing it so it kind of fits the genre that we're going to go for. Undo, undo, undo. All right, moving on. Like, you know, I spent more time on it than I normally would just to kind of show what I was talking about. So, all right, so we basically have this in, so we can kind of decide what we want to do from here. Now, this is where like this song, if we're starting, you know, a new School Breaks track, we up to this point I don't really have any sources of inspiration for it, to be honest. I mean, I've got plenty of new School Breaks tunes that I like. But the question is going to be, you know, do I this? And I think this is where people sometimes start combing through presets and can, you know, get kind of in the rabbit hole, you know. So in a perfect world, we would have already had, you know, one or two sources of inspiration or whatever. Or if we were going to try to make something that would be, you know, like a charting New School Breaks track or whatever, or something that we were going to pitch to a certain label, we would pull that up, whatever that label may be, and start to cater our sound within reason to what we're going to try to deliver to. And I'll preface it with, like, a lot of people, especially producers, you know, have certain strong feelings about sample libraries and are they good, are they bad, da da da. And the way that I look at it, and everyone has their own opinion, and they have their right to their own opinion. Like, you know, if people like the music and if people are dancing to it, I don't have a problem with people using sample libraries. Now, you run the risk of, if you use the whole sample verbatim, hearing someone else using that same exact full sample in their songs. It happens all the time. However, if you're looking for some sort of inspiration, there's no reason that you can't pull a sample or two from a sample library to get you started, and then either chop that up, affect it somehow, use sections of it, take those samples, those audio samples, convert them to MIDI, and then alter them, or come up through that process while you're working with it, come up with a set-aside melody that then you end up taking that sample out altogether. So to me, I look at sample libraries, if you don't have any kind of lyric idea in your head already, I see no problem with that. Okay? And I get it. I'm sure people will say stuff about it like, oh, everyone's going to sound the same, da-da-da. But again, I'm trying to kind of teach a process, and there's something else that people have to really remember, is that when you're producing, you are actually trying, you're a writer and arranger. You're an audio engineer, and you're also trying to be a sound designer. And those are all different those are all different principles, right? Those are all different practices, I guess would be the proper term. So unless you're a team, or one person is doing the arranging and composing and the other person is doing the sound design, you're trying to do a lot by yourself. And with me, this comes back to, how many projects do I have on the table? I've got all my other responsibilities, and if I'm going to try to be creative, I will do what I want, what I'm able to do in that certain amount of time. And from there, I'll decide, how I make that happen, right? And so my advice would be, especially if you're kind of getting started, there's really nothing wrong with using samples and sample libraries, just knowing kind of that can be a stepping stone to where you want to go, or to turning that into a more original thought. And that's where I stand with it. So that's pretty much that. I will also say, I've never heard someone on a dance floor say, like, that's dancing and having a good time, say, well, this is from a sample library, so I'm going to stop dancing right now. Sorry, but never heard it. So for this, that's probably the direction that I would go. Yeah, Josh, that's a good idea. Like reference tracks, again, like when we were talking, like if I was thinking about, a new school track that I really like, I would think of like certain ones that I kind of mentioned already, or certain producers, and kind of start going through and pulling those in, for the purposes here, I could kind of show the way that I might look at it if I didn't have, sample or a few ideas ahead. You can look, again, if this is something that you were doing just to kind of like learn the process and try to make a new song that's a new school song, without trying to cater it to any kind of direction, you could use reference tracks, you could use sample libraries, and the other thing you could do is kind of decide if you want it to be in a certain key, right? So if you're going to do this track and you're going to put it on a mix, and you want it to go towards the beginning or the end, well, if you get a time right, you could be like, hey, I need a track in F minor, so I'm going to make this tune in F minor, right? Because up to this point, we have no reason to pick a certain key, because we don't have a vocal that we have to cater to. We don't have a sample that we're going to use that we have to cater to. So imagine if you have whatever your constraints are, right? When you see some of these creative folks talk about, you need some sort of constraint to be creative within, right? It's kind of like paint on the canvas, not everywhere else. Okay, so that's the constraint, right? So if you're starting a tune and you don't have kind of any guiding point in it, sometimes it's good to say, let's make some sort of constraint to it. Okay? if we're not going to make this sound like a certain song, let's pick a key, right? And then we can start working in there. So that gives us one parameter that we can kind of start, all right, well, cool. If we're going to do this in, B flat minor, all right, that's fine. So we'll do that in B flat minor. We'll do it in A minor or whatever it may be. And then at least your brain can sit everything else aside and start to work within those parameters. And it kind of helps you focus a little bit, and kind of clear out some of the other variables, Adrian, that's right. Like starting with a melody is really the way to go, or starting with a vocal. I mean, you know me. I mean, like I like vocals, man. I've always liked vocals. So if I hear a vocal sample, even if it's just one note, or one part of a drop, yeah, like I'll go through that, and then it says, okay, cool. This song is going to be, in F sharp minor. Not that that's my favorite key to work in, but okay, cool. F sharp minor it is. Sweet. Take the other variables off the shelf. We're good. Like this is what we're going to work in. And I don't know. I like to that's kind of how my brain works. And so yeah, and Adrian, in your music I can tell, like when you hear like starting with the melody, then you're building it around that. And you can still have sick drops and everything else, but at least you got something driving it. And again, that goes back to what we were talking about before, like what's the one thought that you're going to start with this song. So when you sit down and you've got your 45 minutes to work on it after your kids are in bed, before whatever, like what's going to drive that. So when you sit down, you're like, all right, this is going from a melody. I'm going to drop this sample in, and then I'm going to start working on like a counter melody or a bass line to go with it. So you're already like hitting the ground running instead of like tinkering with drum sounds or presets. And I know I'm kind of like going back to that, but like, again, I'm trying to kind of focus on why it's really good to just have that thought in your head before you dive in, right? All right, so I'm gonna do, let's see here. I think I added this folder late, so it's probably gonna shout at me here. So let's do, this kind of ties into something else too. Somebody just name a key. And that's what we're going to do. Because at this point, I don't have a melody picked. I don't have a vocal or anything like that. And I think for this song, for these purposes, I think that'd probably be the best way to go. And while we're doing that, I'm going to show you something that will save so much time and grief. Again, I don't know if you'll be able to see it too well because I'm using that hardware screen capture. Hold on a second. All right, G major or minor? And yes, Mark, you would do your kicks in key, but so one of the things I'm showing is I'm not going to worry about that yet because we don't really know what this tune's going to be yet, and we haven't decided what our key's going to be. So that's a really good point. You always want your kicks to be in key. However, we haven't really determined that yet. So all right, I got a couple D minors. That's a good / kind of tricky key to do stuff in, but I like it. All right, so let's do that. And G's a good one too. Yeah. So, side note, yeah, as far as the kicks, yes, you definitely want to do it. And Mark, one of the things that I did was I had this basic, in this template, just a basic short kick, and it's basically like a top kick. There's not a whole lot going on. And for now, we're just gonna leave that, and then once we decide how this tune's going to go and what key it's going to be, since we don't have anything driving the key yet, we don't have a vocal sample or a synth or a melody that we want to use, we're just going to kind of leave that, and it's basically just kind of like a metronome to kind of keep us in whatever time or feel we're going to try to go for. All right. And side note about keys, this is one thing that I think is pretty cool about club music. It doesn't really affect other genres. Aren't, to me, I'm sure people would argue this, but like other genres to me aren't as kind of sensitive to what key the tune is in. And my argument is because of bass bends in a club, right? And a lot of songs that like Huda and 30A and I do are in F minor because we just love where the subwoofers sit in F, right? This is getting kind of, into the nerdy stuff, but that's fine, right? That's why we're here. I know, like, shout out to G Money, Montana, and Neurosis. Like, they do a lot of songs in G because they like where that sits in the bass bends. Once you start getting a little lower, like D, F, and especially B, B is like one of the hardest spots, in my opinion, because when you go up an octave, when you're talking about those low subwoofer frequencies, like it seems a little high, and when you go down to the lower octave, it only really hits in a club or in a good studio, right? So sometimes when you have tunes that are down like in C or B, and you're trying to hit that really low note, it doesn't always work. It doesn't. Those are kind of hard to translate onto smaller systems, to be honest. And that's one of the things that we're going to get into, like in the future, because one of the things that I always do is have, I use a chart that has the frequencies in the key, so that way I can kind of see where it's at. And so when you're looking at it in an EQ, you can actually see where it's gonna fall, and if it's gonna kind of be too low for most systems, even in some club systems, All right, cool. Let's see here. So one of the things that is a huge time saver, trying to see how long I've been going here. One of the things that is a really big time saver, and once it's kind of a pain to do it, but once you do it, it'll really help. And you've probably heard this on tutorials and stuff before, but yeah, it's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to try it anyway. When I set up my folders, I have them. See, I don't know if I change the resolution on my monitor, it's going to get all crazy here, but I'll try my best to explain it. So when I set up my sample library, I'll go through and organize everything according to key. So again, I had someone really kind of press on me to do this, and I was like, oh god, that's gonna be like, you're talking about so many like terabytes of storage or whatever, and it was a pain, but once I did it, it actually really helped quite a bit. And so the way that I ended up doing it was organizing my folders according to kind of how I would think about them, right? So since you probably can't see it, like I've got vocals, top kick, main kick, 808s and subs, snares and claps, hats, synths, drops, fills, which that could be either drums or kind of like melodic, little half bar fills, top loops, bottom loops. So top loops would be like stuff like drum loops or any kind of thing without a kick in them. FX, percussion, DJ and scratch, especially if there's like, scratch samples, and then all the MIDI, if I've got actually MIDI segments to put in there. Then the trick is you go down and you use something like mixed in key. This is really the way to do it, to be honest. And then you pull, you make a folder of all of this. You copy it first before you start screwing around with anything, right? So you take your originals, you move them in here, and then you pull all those into mixed in key by segment. So, I would start with, say, vocals, right? And you make all these folders. So in my vocals, it'll say like A major, and then we'll get into theory stuff later, but A sharp minor, B flat minor, anything that could have two names. Because sometimes you'll notice on sample libraries, they actually will write keys that actually really aren't keys. Because, they're looking at it whether it's I'm trying to think of an example, enharmonic, but it doesn't really exist. So it's all, again, this is all stuff we'll talk about later, but they'll look at it and say, well, it's a C sharp or a D flat, right? So you make a folder for each one of these. C minor, D, D sharp minor, or E flat minor. You go through and make empty folders for all these. Then you take your sample library and you start going by category, by vocals. And you drag all those vocals in here. And you can see on the left, kind of, where I did this a while back. And you can see kicks to separate vocals, stuff from Splice, blah, blah, blah. And when you go through and you start dragging all these things in here, it'll start analyzing all the different keys. And then you can actually, I could probably do a couple here so you can see. It'll sort them based on what you click. So you could go through and put, trying to see where the other guy went. Say if I did, if I take a couple of these songs and drop them in here, it's going to go through here and figure these out. But what's cool is, and it took me a while to figure this out. I was like doing it the hard way. I was trying to figure out how to grab them. But you can go through here, and after it analyzes everything, you can say, I want all the ones that are in A. And you click on that, and if any of those are in A, as an example, you can select all of them and then drag them into that new empty folder that you've got. Why does that help? Here we go. So we've got C minor, B flat, and this one's an acapella, and it might say all. So if it says all, that means they can't really, usually that's like, rap vocals or acapellas that don't really cater to a key. So again, in these, I also reflected that here. I've got a folder that says all, right? And also like drums, like cymbals, technically cymbals have no real harmonic. There's so many harmonic sounds that they don't have a note, right? And so anyway, you can go through here and you say, all right, C minor, and if you had multiple ones in C minor, you could click on it and it'd sort it, and then you select all of them, drag them into your new folder, and there you go. How does that make things better? So if we're working on a song and we decided that this song is going to be in D minor, and I'm having a hard time trying to figure out where I want to start, well, maybe I could go in here and look in my folder under D minor and start scrolling through synth sounds. And again, like with these, some of these might have a long sample that you could just pull one sound out of it. And guess what? You could spend an hour and a half trying to sound design your own sound that's going to sound pretty much exactly like one of these drop sounds that you would want to use as a lead. Like, let's be honest. So that's kind of how my workflow is for some of these tunes, especially if I'm trying to find a place to start. The other thing that's nice is that if you set it up, now this setup doesn't always work for DJ setups, but one of the preferences here is that you can come up here and tell it that you want it to rename the keys, and it'll yell at you. It'll say, hey, if you're using Ableton or Traktor or whatever, you could have problems. But for this purpose, I tell it, I want either sharps or flats, and actual not Camelot keys like 10A or 10B. Like, I actually want the actual note, so that way it'll I can sort them, put them in here, and it'll be in the name. And something that you'll find that's kind of funny, that is a side note of this, is sometimes you'll have sample libraries, especially on things like Splice, where it's kind of a wide range of people that are uploading samples to it. You'll find that there is some of the keys that they say are a lot of times not right. So this is a way to kind of double check some of that. Or it'll be a relative minor or a relative major or something like that, and that'll actually kind of lead to new ideas that you might not have thought of. Something that you can do, and this is some the theory questions that I had before, like when you get into tunes and you're trying to think of a way to make a cool drop, you can take a song that's a major and make the drop a minor that's the relative minor, and the key still works, and it's simple, but it works really well. And that's a way that you can kind of get to that point through that whole process. And again, I mean, a lot of people, I think Splice is a really good resource too. When you're using this workflow, the thing that you run into is that it's with Splice, the way that the file structure works is it's housed here. Let me switch over. Anything that you've downloaded will be stored locally in the Splice folder. So if you use Splice, which again, I'm not an advocate of any, I don't get paid anything for any of these. I'm just saying things that have worked well for me that are kind of relevant. Another option is Noise. I tried that for a while. They had a plugin that actually worked with your DAW that would time stretch and stuff. I thought that was a great idea, but I got really frustrated with their search engine and their no knock against it, just for me, the search terms and stuff just didn't really work for me. With Splice, I think there's some good sounds on there, and you can find stuff really quickly. And again, what workflow works best for you? If you want to make your own 808 hi-hat sounds, that's cool. Or you can come in here and search for 808 hi-hat sounds in whatever key you want and find them really quickly. And again, that's my kind of philosophy for it. So anyway, regardless, when you're on here and what happens with Splice, if you haven't used it, once you download stuff, it goes into a local folder, and this front end will basically allow you to sort stuff you've already downloaded by whatever filters you're going to use. So on here, you would have, say we're in D minor, I think that was the winner, and this will have sounds that I already downloaded, and some of these that are grayed out would be ones that I downloaded on my laptop, maybe, that I haven't synced. And again, kind of tying back to stuff that we were talking about before with how much time you have to be creative. If I ever have to be on any kind of commute or traveling, or in the airport, you can ask anybody that's traveled with me. I'm on my laptop the whole time working on music. When I'm on a flight, I'm working on music. Because it's that time all becomes cumulative. You know what I mean? 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. And so what I've started doing over the years is basically working on kind of arrangements and thoughts on my laptop. And then when it gets to the point that I want to start doing a mix down, I take that whole session and, collect all the files and move it on to the big computer in the studio. And then I start working on a mix. And again, with your kind of workflow stuff, I don't ever try to mix on my laptop on headphones, because I'm going to end up undoing most of that crap that I've already done on my headphones and wasting more time both sides, right? So little things that worked out that way. So that's one of the little things that I was going to talk about earlier, but you get the point, right? 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, it starts to build up, And so that's something that's worked for me. And so sometimes if I'm traveling or whatever, I'll, pull this up or be working on a song just to get the ideas out of my head. And then, it's basically out on paper, for lack of better terms. So anyway, that's what these are. These haven't synced, some of them. And, at some point I can do this. But the only downside is if you're using this interface, you know, where you're using this kind of front end, at some point you would have to go through and pull all these guys out and run them through, you know, mixing key again, and then drop them into all those those folders. Do I do that? Not usually. I try to like set a reminder on my calendar to do it at like every 6 months. And I'm pretty much due. And what I'll also do is if I find, you know, there's some great stuff by Cymatics, there's great stuff. Vengeance makes really good stuff. And again, a lot of times what I'll do is just chop some of it up and just use a synth lead sound. But when I do that and I get some downloads from some of these other companies and support them, then I will go through, yeah, it's about once every 4 months or every 6 months, and just kind of suck it up and go through and scan everything and drop it back in. But in the interim, what's nice is with this interface, you can say, all right, we're in D minor. What have we already downloaded? And what is showing up? And then you start to use the search criteria and stuff like that. And it's good. I mean, for all of us who used to pay for a full sample library, you know, and nothing against those. I used to have partnerships with some of the companies that made them, and the content was great, but I would only use a small amount because it was only, even if the genre was what I wanted, only a few things would actually work for the projects that I had. And what's nice about this is that you can, you know, kind of have credits and stuff and go from there, and you pick one sound. So if you're doing a song in D minor, and let me flip back. Again, I am no way affiliated with any of these places. I'm just trying to show some different options, you know. If you know, you're looking for some sort of sound, and with this one, we don't really have a melody or anything driving it. So we could say, you know, let's find a lead. What kind of sound do we want? I don't know if there'll be a new school one, but how about this? What if we look for like a trap one, right? And so we could try to like take the new school foundation and then kind of make some trap things happen with it. And then we could kind of see where that takes us, right? So we're going to kind of not redo something that was done in 03 or 04 or 05, but maybe we could kind of build on that and kind of morph it a little bit. All right, so now I'm just going to kind of scroll through here and let's see what we find. All right, so for some reason I like that. Now, are we going to use that exact sample? I don't know. 70 beats a minute, whatever. I'm going to grab it because it's one credit, you know. And again, we're not buying like a $30 sample pack. We're going to just get one credit. And I don't even know how many credits I have. I do the monthly thing, and I don't use it all the time. So yeah, that's kind of how I work through it. And I'll be like, basically anything that I hear that I'm like, that makes me kind of turn my head, I'm like, oh, cool. And then I'll just kind of grab it and then not really worried about it. And then if we use it, that's good. And if we don't, that's fine. And if just hearing that kind of gets us to an idea, then that's cool too. Like, again, like talking about what's the process, right? We're trying to just kind of forge a new direction for this song, and we really don't have anything that we're basing it on. The only thing that we've said was we want a new school song in D minor, right? I'm kind of digging that. And as you look at these, you just want to kind of be cognizant of the tempo. I mean, you know, for breaks, especially nowadays, I mean, breaks will be like 128 to 132, maybe down to 125. It depends. Like, so if I do a tune that's like 125 or 124, a lot of times it's because the vocal that I use in it was a lot slower. And if I go any further, it's going to start really like having all kind of artifacts, or it's just going to sound funky. So if I'm looking at that, like that's a cool drop sound, but what was it? 140? 144. I'm going to grab it, but you know, you just want to keep an eye on that, especially if you're getting into trap or stuff that's like half time or double time. If we're doing a song that's 128 and those samples are 150, that might be pushing it a little bit. Generally speaking, and the algorithms for each DAW are different. Generally speaking, it's a little easier to go faster than it is to go slower. I mean, that's kind of the easiest way to look at it. So you can take like a tropical house pluck sound that's like 100 beats per minute and drop and speed it up to 130. And most of the time it'll sound okay. If you go 130 to 100, you know, you're going to have a lot of oversampling and stuff, and sometimes it's not going to work. Now, that said, if you really like that melody, you can convert that to MIDI and go through and turn it into your own kind of thing. So, you know, when we're talking about ways to get ideas, that's a way that I would kind of look at it. Yeah, Jason. So complex, I almost always go to complex. So Jason had a question asking about time stretching. So what happens is in Ableton, there's a lot of different options. So I downloaded a couple of these and I'll pull them in and I'll show you real quick. And so in Ableton, like one of the things that's great about Ableton, and this has been kind of one of their things from the get-go, is that they do time stretching really well, right? And everything's kind of based on this. And I do know the caveat. I know Logic's actually caught up to speed. Dan was telling me about it lately. I haven't had a chance to check the new update, but I will. So that said, there's different options that have different kind of algorithms to work with. Yes, and I'll show you a couple of tricks, Jason, that you can use. Because that's part of why I'm kind of picking ones, like one, if they sound cool, but also like if they're too slow or too fast. And then I can show you some things that you can do with it. The other thing that'll get you is if there's a lot of reverb, and you know, a lot of these sounds will have multiple reverbs. They'll have one on the insert, like one on the insert and one on the bus, right? So you'll have this kind of metallic sounding reverb, and then you'll also have one that's a send that has kind of a more like wider sound to it, right? So that's what really causes problems with both the algorithms for time stretching, and it also causes problems with if you want to use an audio to MIDI option. You can either do that with Melodyne, you can do it within Ableton, but like delays, but especially you know, really stylized reverbs will just jack things up, and what happens is the computer will hear, you know, 2 or 3 fundamental sounds, and then it just shows that there's like 9 or 10, you know, sounds, and then you're like, oh crap, and you're going through and editing a whole bunch of stuff, and it ends up being longer than just trying to figure out by hand what the original producer was doing. All right, I'm going to go through one more page here real quick, and then we're going to go back to this. It's funny to see the names too. Like this is under trap, but it says MAU5, like Dead Mouse. Like that does sound like Dead Mouse, you know. This is an example of one where it says D minor and it might have a D minor at the end of it, but most of the time if you try to shove this into a tune that's in D minor, it'll be kind of like a square peg round hole situation again. I'm going to play it again. All right, so what I'm going to do real quick, you can see up top here. Usually they'll filter in here, but you can go here to like ones that were recently added, and you can kind of scroll through the ones that we have. And again, I'm talking strictly about a process that you could use if you don't have a preconceived idea what you want to do. If the only kind of parameters that we've decided up to this point are that we want a new school track that's in D minor, right? That's it. We haven't been sitting around, drinking our coffee one morning saying, "Man, I got to sample this vocal from this whomever song," or that, I thought this idea for a lead that I want to start building upon. All right, so I'm going to play this loop again real quick, and I'm going to scroll through these, and then this is what I'm going to do really quickly. Now, I will preface it with this. Ableton, hold on, I'll back up. One thing that Ableton does has always been unique up until basically the last Logic update, from what I've been told. Again, I haven't had a chance to look at it. Ableton does have this other view where you can drop all these different samples from a sample library, and it's already going to be time synced, and you can actually go through and play a loop and start just firing clips. Let me switch to the other screen here. You can start firing clips, and it'll all be time sequenced, and that's like a really cool way to work. I've done a couple tunes that way, because to be honest, you're going through it and you're trying to find out what's going to work well with the other thing, and then you go from there. But and as far as hardware goes, like that's one of the modes, one of the 4 modes that the Ableton Push uses. For these purposes, I'm not going to kind of use that technique, because that, again, it's pretty much, with the exception of the Logic update, it's pretty much specific to Ableton. So I'm going to go through here and just kind of like listen to some of the things that we downloaded and see like if they still sound good, or if I was like, what was I thinking? Adrian, that was a really good, I have not heard that, and I'm telling you, like, I appreciate you making that comment. Adrian had a comment about when you're trying to do audio to MIDI, if you've got like crazy, if you've got, hold on, let me check. Yeah, turning your audio sample into beats mode, and then turning the transients down, so that basically you're forcing Ableton to cut all that crap out, and then when it converts it to MIDI, it's got like a cleaner sound. Dude, I really appreciate that, man. That's a really good trick, and I've definitely learned something, so nice. All right, so say this tune's at 128, and I'm gonna drop this one lead in that's at 150. Let's just hear how it sounds. And also, these sample libraries usually, like I was saying before, any kind of sample library is usually really affected. It's usually pretty loud. So if you drop these into your DAW and the levels are at 0, you're probably going to get blasted pretty hard. So I almost always try to like drop them down. Or you can have subgroups that, the subgroup is turned down a little bit. But that's just kind of a warning, because you will blow your speakers. Well, not blow your speakers, but you know what I mean. Scare yourself at the least. So what you could do is 150, and this song's at 128. What if we doubled it, right? I never remember which one's the right one. Let's try it. Sorry, I forgot to hit the pedal that time. These are the different options, and basically they're different algorithms for how you're stretching the time. Once I start to go, like an octave or close to an octave, I usually use complex. And again, you can mess with them, and sometimes things will surprise you as far as what works better. Complex Pro gives you a little bit more control over it, but most of the time I've noticed that complex really just kind of works. Another trick you can do if you're stretching time a lot, or if you're stretching not time, if you're stretching pitch a lot, you can double it and then make one go up an octave and put them both on complex, and then it'll actually make a pretty cool sound. So you're basically doubling a lead that's an octave. All right, so if we ran with that one for a little bit, like say we just cut it, and we just use this kind of like kind of like an ARP sound or something, and then we duplicate it. And then if you want to fatten it up, you can do what I was just mentioning, right? What if we doubled it? And then I select these and then drop them down an octave. And there's another trick that you can do, but you got to really watch it if you're going to do it. This goes back to like some sound design tricks. You can, in like the old analog synths, like the Moogs, you could have multiple oscillators, and on purpose you would detune one oscillator a little bit. Say if you go negative, 20 cents, and then on the other thing and you go positive 20 cents. What that's going to do is cause like a weird kind of spatial thing that makes the synth sound bigger. But if you push it too hard, it'll mess with, like, obviously you're messing with the pitch. The mouse got a little ahead of me there, but anyway, that's something that you can do. That was used a lot in like Euro synth leads, like the Ferry Corsten kind of stuff, and it works. But you have to be cognizant of like how hard you're pushing it, and also like what you're trying to do. If it's a lower sound that should be mono, you don't really want to be treating it, in something that's going to cause basically like sample delay, left and right channel stuff going on. And that's basically what happens. So if you did something like this, you could go through, and usually if you're going to double or triple anything, or not triple, but if you're going to double something and you also want to do like, or if you want to do multiple, say, synth drop lead sounds together, best practice would be to group these two sounds together. And then that way, I don't know what we'd call it, sequence for now. And then that way you could affect both of them together, whether it would be compression or reverb, or if you wanted to put a gate on it, maybe like for this, that might be something that you could look at doing. And again, like this is taking, a little bit of time because I'm talking through all this, but this process would really be kind of just scrolling through these things to try to get some sort of an idea of where we wanted to go with it, right? So normally if I would have done that, I would have dropped that in, messed around with it a little bit, say, oh, this is cool, or maybe we'll double it, whatever. Let's move on. What else do we want to add? What do we want to, what's our next step, right? I'm not gonna worry about, yeah, I grouped it, but I'm not going to put effects on it. I'm not going to do reverb. I'm not going to do any of that crap. I'm just going to keep going. So I'm just messing around with this again. I just want to see what this sounds like, you know, original speed and halftime. And the only reason I'm really messing with the halftime is because you're looking at 150. Like those are trap speeds. Like they could be 150 or 75. Some trap will be around 135 or 140, which is closer to breakbeat speed. But you can find really cool things if you're going at stuff that's halftime and you play it double time, and it ends up sounding like a really cool ARP line. So like another thing you can do is mess around with like things being up an octave or down an octave, and a lot of times it's a simple thing you can do, but it works really well. So like say if we do the first two down at the original octave and then we do the next two at a higher octave. And then another little trick is if you're doing stuff like that, I try to say like, so these are this kind of orange color. If these look the same, if they're the same sample, but I've done something with them different, I'll like pick another orange. So at least my brain knows, hey, like you've done something different with those. I don't know. I'm not really feeling that, but I'm just trying to kind of give some ideas um, when you're just trying to throw something on paper to see what you can come up with. So at this part we're kind of starting from the beginning of the song, and so we haven't had an idea of a certain drop or anything like that. So what we're doing right now is just kind of figuring out how we're going to get this thing going, and then from here we would need to think about what's our next decision. If we're trying to just lay this foundation that the song is going to have this certain kind of groove or this certain kind of key structure and kind of genre, then let's just go from here and decide what the next part will be, right? And so with that thought, you just kind of move in groups of 8, right? We haven't really wasted much time on here, doing anything with sound design, doing anything with these, because we're just, trying to get ideas out. And we're not coming in with any kind of thought like, yo, we got to use this sample in it. We gotta, cut this piano part and drop it in. And that was with a quick look on Splice as an example. So following that kind of process, all right, well, we picked D minor. Well, let's see what I have on here. I could look through here and find like, let me look through my synths or look through, some of my drops on here and see if I find something that, might lead me to the kind of the next transition. I mean, that'll work. I mean, it's going in the trap direction, but we could either drop that in and use a larger segment of it, or we could drop it in a sampler, or we could just drop it in and just use the brass drop and just cut the rest out. Depending on whichever direction you want to go with it. And one thing that's good to think about, there's 2 different ways to look at like reverb tails, right? So you hear this sound. You could cut it off right at the downbeat of the second, and actually, Adrian and I we had a bunch of conversations about this with snare. if you have a snare drum that has a long reverb on it, generally you want that reverb to go, until the next kick starts, right? Or until the next snare drum sound starts. So there's two different ways to do it. If you're working in an arrangement that has a long reverb, if you're using it as a send, it'll continue to go even after the sample stops. But one of the big trends when you listen to like Flowstradamus or Nightmare, it's really effective, especially in like trap and hybrid trap, some of the festival music, like using these long reverb tails, but bouncing it down into the actual sound. So that way you can just make that reverb stop on a dime. And it's a really cool effect, but you want to make sure you're doing it just right. So like with that brass like drop, you would want to know when that reverb stops, like what's your next boom, and you want that reverb to go right into your next hit, and be really methodical about like using that as an advantage. And it's really cool, man. It's a really cool effect, and definitely like some of the I guess they call it a hybrid trap is the thing that they call it now, but definitely Flowstradamus uses it a lot, and so does Nightmare, and it's a really cool technique. It has kind of a different feel than if you're using a bus to send your reverbs to. So anyway, like we're kind of like scrolling through this relatively quick, aside from me yapping a lot. But like this is a way that you can kind of do this, and as your sample library grows, you can use these basically as a stepping stone to figure out what you want to do next and how you can kind of shape this song. And then from there, when we start to kind of build this idea, we can go back to these samples that we used earlier, and like we might be like, dude, these don't sound good anymore because this whole song has gone in a different direction. That's fine because we haven't really spent that much time on it. And that's like one of the concepts I want to drive home. Like you can drop stuff in, and to really like when you're using the other screen in Ableton, that is a cool way to use the what do they call it, session view, when you're firing clips, and just kind of messing around with stuff. And that's one of the things that was really neat about Ableton when it came out. They were trying to find a new way to make that happen. But yeah, so anyway, my point is, however you're kind of getting through the process, as long as you're getting there and you're not really, kind of going down that rabbit hole of getting stuck, you're still moving forward. You know what I mean? And if you're working in sections, then you can kind of finish one sentence and then come back to it later. All right, I'm multitasking now because my camera battery died. So I am changing the battery in the camera, and I'm going to look at the feed here because I want to make sure there's not any questions that I missed. But as I was just kind of scrolling through those, one thing to really keep in mind is these sample libraries. Most of them have a straight beat thought to them. Okay, like some of these are Vengeance, some of these are prime loops, like the cymatics. These are all good things. If they are sidechained, and this is something we'll talk about later, like if they're sidechained, you're gonna get that pumping sound to it. Now, one thing that makes any kind of breakbeat music different. Sorry, I'm looking for a battery pack. one thing that makes any kind of breakbeat music different is that you don't have that straight beat that you can sidechain all the time. And what that means is when the kick fires, you don't have the compression that pushes everything back down. And so when you're using sample libraries, you have to actually kind of look out for that, because it'll have this really weird this really weird kind of rocking this rocking sound to it, because the sounds, whether it's a bass line or a lead, has this like this upbeat pump to it, but with breaks it has a broken beat, obviously, and so you'll have these two kind of factors that are going back and forth. One really good example of that was that Chainsmokers song that was really popular, and I saw some sort of interview with them, and they're like, yeah, we did that on accident. Like, we had something sidechained to straight beat, but it was a breakbeat song, and we're like, well, this is really weird, but I guess we're just going to go through it. And it's kind of like a Bob Ross happy accident kind of thing. I got to grab a battery real quick. Hold on a second. Adrian, what can you tell me what you said? That's exactly what I do. Can you elaborate on that real quick while I'm changing this camera battery? Yeah, the sidechain thing will really kind of it can really mess with you if and really one of the things that I find a lot more challenging about any kind of broken beat music when you're talking about electronic music production is that you're gonna actually deal with struggles that in house music and in EDM that aren't really an issue, primarily because it's a lot easier to mix over a straight beat, like, because you always have something pushing everything out of the way, and so with broken beat music, it's a different it's a different beast, and so you have to, when you get into talking about compression and stuff like that, there's you can go too heavy on it. It's really easy to go too heavy on it, and then next thing you know, it's you're really affecting the sound in maybe a not pleasurable way. So something that may be worth noting is that, as I'm trying to change this camera thing, it's driving me nuts. Um, the way that I'll work a lot of times is I'll start trying to get my idea down, and for this is a good example because we're kind of just you know throwing things out to see if it sticks, right? And this would be the point that, if I'm looking at something and I'm like, all right, well, at what point do things become, kind of counterintuitive, or what point do things become, are you banging your head against the wall? And one of the things that I'll do a lot of times is I'm a firm believer in, starting something and then, taking it as far as you can. And then before it becomes potentially, detrimental, just kind of, leaving it where it is. I'm going to do a plan B for my camera here, and I'm switching to a different one. One thing that you can do that I find really really pretty neat. I'm into kind of some of the nerdy shows, right? And one of the ones I used to like a lot was Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. And one of the things that they did on one of those, let's see if I can get this. We're gonna go a different route. We're gonna use a different webcam here. One of the things that I saw on one of the Through the Wormhole shows that I thought was really cool was they did studies on people that would play video games, and this was like this is like legit, science based. It wasn't just people, sitting around playing Street Fighter, or I don't even know what kids play anymore, but they found out that they would get to a certain point and not be able to get past it. And then the next morning, you better believe that they would sit down and play the game and immediately pass it, whatever the part was that they couldn't get past before. And it really speaks volumes to how our brains work, and how we actually think about things when our bodies kind of, air quotes, shut down, right? So let me see if I can switch to this scene here. All right, and it just shows you how technology works too, right? Had a couple of cameras set up. One battery died, and the other one has just been really weird. But my point is that, we're kind of talking about processes, right? We've talked about a lot of stuff. And one of the things that I really think, regardless of the technical stuff and me yapping the whole time, is that, you reach a point and you're like, hey, do I keep hammering at this, with a sledgehammer, or do I just say, well, crap, man, I could watch, that next episode of Ozark or whatever that I've been thinking about, and then this will be here tomorrow, or the next day off that you have. And so take the time that you have that we've used and then just leave it, right? And I bet you between now and the next time, if we meet up again next week, right? Between now and then, we'll have some ideas that have come up. And, maybe some of you will send me some stuff. Maybe I'll go through and listen to some old, new school vinyl of mine between now and then. And then, then you come back to it and you've got fresh ears, first of all, and also a fresh brain, to address it. And to me, that's such an important thing, because, man, turning it on and turning it off, and then you just, we've all done this, right? Especially when you come to doing a mix down and your ears are tired and you're tired, and then you're just, the last 20 minutes of a session, you undo 2 hours of work. And that's so detrimental. You just got to stop. You just got to stop and say, all right, we're done. We're done. I'm going to go play, Mario Kart on my kid's Nintendo Switch or whatever it is, and just leave it at that. And we can come back to this, and that's kind of how I've started to work time and time again. And it just, to me, it makes me, it makes it so much more enjoyable, because this is supposed to be fun. Whether you're doing this for money, whether you're doing this for yourself, whatever it may be, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be an outlet. So yeah, when it starts to get like that, and I'm using this as a good example, we messed around, we didn't really have a specific idea, which is fine. And then, so I think that's actually a good kind of, cue point to say, all right, let's see where we go from here, and let's kind of sleep on it, right? And let's come back to it. And if anybody wants to have any if anybody has any ideas, if you want to send me some samples that you're thinking about, or we don't have to stick to this key. If you've got some other ideas, you can send them to me. You can either email them or send me a messenger or something like that. But like, I will work on my technical stuff too, because like I think, you know, my wife always laughs at me. Like I'm like, you know, it's like Chevy Chase. Like, I don't ever overdo anything. She's like, yeah, you know, I know how this goes, but I think I try to make it a little too elaborate. But what I'm going to do is cut down some camera angles and we'll go from there. And then, yeah, let's circle back. And then if you guys have any questions, like message me or email me, like DJ Sweet Charlie at Gmail, or on Facebook or whatever platform you want to use. And then I'm going to try my best to try to do this like every Wednesday. I think we picked 9:30 Eastern because of our friends in the West Coast, so we could try to like get everybody on at the same time. So I hope you all enjoyed it. That's a good one, bobbleheading. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's like. I keep a lot of my little Funko Pop bobblehead guys, you know, because it does kind of help remind me of that too. Well, cool. I'm glad that, you know, we've had a lot of good feedback, and a lot of people have reached out to me up to this point. And you know, it took me a long time to get it going, but I was trying to make sure that I kind of had a thought and not, you know, some sort of a roadmap, but also I wanted to make it at least so we could kind of have a plan, right? And like I said, if anybody has any questions or anything else, hit me up, and then I'm gonna kind of see what I come up with, and I'm gonna go through and kind of look at my notes of things that people had reached out to, and kind of see how we could kind of structure the next few times. And I'm thinking if Wednesday works for everybody, I think that'll be a good way to do it. And hopefully, you know, we can all, you know, have a good creative outlet and kind of learn things just like tonight, like everybody learned from each other. That was really cool. Adrian, thank you for hopping on, man. And I can't wait till the next tune we do together. And I'm dropping one of your songs on the next Funky Flavor mix that might be coming out pretty soon. And that's it, man. Love you all, and thanks for your support. And again, hit me up if you got any questions. And yeah, that's about it. Cool. I don't know what to do from here, so I'm gonna try to hop on out. All right. Love you all.